On this episode, we get to talk with Wes Gay about how to get people to pay attention. Well, hey there, and welcome to another episode of the Church Leadership Lab podcast. I am your host, Kendall Connor, and our goal with this podcast is simple. It is really just to have conversations that empower healthy churches. And we've got a great one planned for you today. Joining us all the way from Atlanta, Georgia, is Wes Gay. Now, listen, if you don't know Wes, let me tell you all about him. Wes is someone who is passionate that clarity is king. He believes that if an organization can get clarity right, that they can reach more people, they can grow their impact, and they can align their teams around a mission. Wes runs Wayfinder, which is a Storybrand certified agency. And so each and every day, they are out there helping organizations to find the right words to say to engage people. And that includes working with nonprofits all the way up to billion-dollar brands. So I'm telling you, this guy knows his stuff when it comes to helping an organization grow. As I mentioned, he is in Atlanta, where he lives with his wife and his 3 kids. Today, we get the privilege of jumping into the topic of how church leaders can constantly just get people to pay attention, which is no easy feat, right? And so without further ado, let's jump into my conversation today with Wes. Well, hey there, Wes. Thanks so much for being on here with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to be able to connect with you in this way. And I know that, being able to share so much, you got so much experience helping people to communicate things and bring clear messaging. So I know this is going to be a really good conversation.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. When I worked in churches, these are the kind of conversations I wish I had heard to make my life a lot easier.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm hoping for today as we jump into this. Now, so look, we just read off your public bio and all that was great and sounds super impressive and everything. But I always just like to, when people come on the show, get a little bit extra out of you. Is there anything that doesn't quite make that public bio, maybe that your family and friends would know about you?
Great question. There's probably a lot of things. One of them is I'm a big coffee guy.
Nice.
Tend to go espresso, although I do love a good single origin pour over, which is a very diva thing to say. I'm particularly partial to the cortado. For those who are not familiar, because Starbucks doesn't carry it, they carry caffeinated milkshakes these days. The cortado is basically a double shot of espresso with equal parts steamed milk, and when it is done right, cannot be beat. So I'm a big coffee guy. There's probably 100 other things that I can come up with that are even more, that are very ridiculous.
Well, I got to stop you right there, just because before this, I thought I was a coffee guy. I thought I had this down, but you're speaking. It's like you're speaking another language to me as we're talking through this.
I mean, I'm like, I'm a single origin guy when I do like a pour over. So I use a V60 pour over. If you want to get real, weigh the beans, time it, the whole thing.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a little obnoxious, and it's been that way for a long time. And I love the AeroPress. I don't use the French press as much really anymore. Sometimes I channel my inner old man and use a mocha pot. If you've never used a mocha pot, you can get them at Target. There's little things that like a stovetop espresso maker. They're very popular.
Oh, it's like the little silver pot, right? Mm-hmm. I've seen those actually in Target now that you're saying it.
Yeah, I bought one a year or two ago because I had started following this coffee guy on YouTube, James Hoffman, who's great. And boy, does he fall into the deep end of all the coffee nerdy things. And so, but yeah, it's probably, I mean, here we are. I'm already just being a little ridiculous.
No, that's great. This is the extra content that our listeners come for. They're going to go and be able to try some of these coffee after this.
Yeah. All of the churches I live in suburban Atlanta. So all the churches, the cool non-denom churches who like to work in coffee shops anyway, go try the cortado next time.
All right. I've got my assignment after this. That sounds awesome. Tell us a little bit about your journey. And I know that, these days you're helping so many people to bring clarity to their messaging, but how did you get there?
So before I started doing what I'm doing now in 2016, into 2016, okay. I became what was called a Storybrand certified copywriter. And if those of you who are familiar, some of your audience may remember Donald Miller from the Blue Light Jazz days 20 years ago. And about 10 years ago, he shifted more of a business author, kind of speaker guy.
Yes.
And wrote a book called Building a Story Brand. A year before that book came out, they announced this copywriter certification. I didn't know what a copywriter was because before that I'd worked in churches for 6 or 8 years. My dad's a worship pastor, still is. And I I didn't know what a copywriter was. Churches don't have money to hire copywriters. And the nonprofit I worked at didn't hire them either. But I knew I was a decent writer and a decent communicator, and I was in kind of a transition. I thought, well, I'll do this until I figure out a real job. The year before I graduated from seminary, and things didn't work out. And I'm like, well, I'll see what happens. Well, it quickly became my full-time job. Within 6 weeks, I essentially had a full-time client load, essentially running a business now. And it's taken off from there. So that's how I got started. Was way back then, just saying, hey, I need an opportunity. I need something. I may as well try to go work for myself for a season. And my wife and I are like, well, until I get a real job. And that was 8 years ago. And I guess it's a real job now.
Wow. No, that's amazing. And kind of hearing, the story of working with churches. So you have that background and understand that world. And, I'm sure you said that your dad is a worship pastor and is still working in that. I'm sure you're still kind of seeing some of that world some. And so you understand that, but then also the copywriting side, also the marketing side and all of that. And everything that I've seen with Storybrand has been so impressive. And so I'm excited to hear a little bit more about that. I know that, working in churches and serving in churches, I know that these ministries that can often feel that they are, I guess a way to say it is they're competing with a lot of different voices for attention. Attention, sure. We know there's only so much of it that people have to give these days, right? And so I'm just curious from your experience, what is the best first step that a ministry leader could take to make sure that their messages are actually connecting? What they're saying is actually getting to the ears of, the people that they're trying to get to.
Yeah, we could talk for hours on this one question. And I will tell you, before I started working with businesses, and I've worked with a few hundred companies and organizations at this point, small, large, local, global, for-profit, nonprofit, and a few large churches in between. Every organization struggles with this problem. So the first thing I would say is churches, today is an opportunity to realize while the function of working in a church can be a different thing than any other job, I get that. This is not one of those things that's any different. Every business and every organization, every nonprofit on the planet is trying to figure out how do we cut through the noise? How do we get heard? How do we get seen? From the lawn care company in your town to the financial advisor to the insurance broker to the car dealership to the whatever. Like everybody in your congregation, their companies are trying to figure out how do we cut through the noise. The first step is, I think, to realize this is a problem everybody has. I would say the next step I would then take in terms of an action step is when I'm trying to now communicate, if I want to cut through, this may step on some toes, but here we go. I would stop paying attention to some of the people who prescribe what churches ought to be doing, and I would look more to what businesses are doing. One of the tricks, frankly, that I would use my clients is, let's just follow the money. Like, where is money being spent? Where is money being made? All those kinds of things. When we follow that path, it's going to reveal the insights we actually need for a company to increase sales and grow their business. In churches, I would say, look where companies are spending their money. How are they spending their money? What kinds of things are they investing in to help them get better or to help them grow? I had a call yesterday with a guy who was telling me about this $100 million client of his. And he said, they're spent a bunch of money on us because they know they could probably grow quite significantly in the next 24 months. Right? I mean, there's a lot of stakes. There's a lot of money being spent there. Now, what are they going to do that's going to help them grow? From a messaging and communication standpoint, is I think they're going to do, this is the thing that most churches do not do at all. And that is when you go to communicate your announcements, your ministries, your whatever you're doing, is we got to start with a problem. Right? So the first action step I would say is when you're trying to communicate something, what problem does the thing you're going to announce solve? Years ago, I'm working in a church that we were in kind of this trifecta of all the reasons why not to ask for money. We had been without a senior pastor for a long time, through a pretty tumultuous season, going into the summer, and we needed to raise $100,000 for a new roof, which is like the most uncool thing to raise money for. Right? It's not for kids, it's not for missions, it's not for youth camp. It's like a roof. The reality was this was a 20-year roof that was 32 years old. So it was 12 years overdue to be replaced. Wow. We had gone on the roof and they had numbered all the patches they had made over the years. The highest number we could find was 256.
Wow.
Right. Just bananas. The problem was it had gotten to the point it was so bad every time it rained, it would essentially create a small flood in that third floor of that building, which was our youth floor. So that was our student ministry space, had like the cafe kind of area, the worship space, small group space, all that stuff. We're like ruined electronics.
The students are swimming. They're in rainstorms.
Basically, kayak into our small groups. And so what happened was it created all these problems. And so our students could no longer meet. And then we had to move in our fellowship hall, which is like, again, the most uncool place for kids, 100 students to meet. And it was just killing us. Like our numbers are going down, morale was down. We had no space for our students. And so when we built that campaign out, some people said, hey, we should actually make it all about the shingles that we're going to use on this roof. And I thought, there's not a person in our congregation who gives a rip about what shingles we're using. They care about a problem to solve. And so we positioned it around the problem to solve was we have no space for our student ministry. We counted, we're in, like I said, the Atlanta suburbs. And I went online and just basically said, okay, within 15-minute drive of our campus, where we are, what are all the public middle schools and high schools? Count those up with Google, previous year's attendance, because a lot of stuff's public. It's like 30,000 kids. We got big high schools here. And there's like 22 high schools in our county that are all 7A in Georgia. It's nuts. But the problem was we had no space for them now. And so the problem to solve was not we need a new roof. The problem to solve was we need a space to invest in our students, to preach the gospel to them, to disciple them, to encourage them, to love and support them, and those kinds of things, and then hopefully send them to their campuses and they can be the light of Christ on their campus. Now we have a problem to solve, which means by donating and giving to that campaign, we're now participating in solving the problem. So oftentimes
people care about that.
Communicate, people would care. That's the biggest thing that great companies do is they identify a clear problem to solve, and then the solution is obviously buying their thing.
Wow. And I want to stop you to touch on a couple of things that you've said. The first, super encouraging to know, because I'm telling you, there is a church leader somewhere who's sitting there feeling like this is a problem that's unique to them, right? We just can't figure this out. But I love that you said that this is something that people, churches, businesses, organizations, everyone is dealing with and trying to figure that out. So that's number one, super encouraging. But then also just hearing your heart in that, churches don't have to figure this because it isn't something that is only for churches, that we can look to other places, see what has worked in other organizations, what has worked in other businesses. And I just love this example of not making it about the shingles that are going on the roof, right? Because, we probably as leaders, a lot of times we are looking into those things, right? We're looking into the nitty gritty, and we get excited about sometimes, okay, we're going to do it this way or have it be that way. But really, you've got to give people something that they care about. And it sounds like that meeting the needs of the students in that area is exactly a perfect example of that.
Yeah, you said something that a lot of church leaders struggle with, but also a lot of businesses struggle with. And that is they forget that the people they're communicating to are not on their staff. Right. I can't tell you how many companies I work with. One of the examples I use with companies is this idea that when we use confusing or insider language, what we're doing is actually it's like handing somebody an 8-pound bowling ball, but covering it in Vaseline and saying, here you go, hold this. Right. And churches are the biggest culprits of this, by the way. Somebody new comes to your church on Sunday morning and they say, hey, what do you have for our 10th grade son? And you go, well, Collide meets in the attic for Impact. And they immediately go like, why do I need a medical release form and a helmet for whatever that is? What they meant to say was the high school students meet upstairs on Wednesday nights at 6:30, right? Businesses do the same thing. And it's this concept called the curse of knowledge, where you know what you're talking about at a level 9 or 10 on a scale of 1 to 10. Your audience understands it at a 1 or 2. And so we don't often, and again, companies do the same thing. I could tell you 100 stories of clients in the last year that have done this, where they don't do the work to say, okay, we're a 9 or 10. We've got to take it down to a 1 or 2 because our audience, for businesses, as customers, for nonprofits, as donors, for churches, its members, they're not in our staff meetings. They're not in our hallway conversations. They're not in our email threads. They're not on Slack or Microsoft Teams. They're not on calls. They're not in our project planning. They're not in all that. They're not in any of that stuff. They have their own world, their own stuff. I mean, how many of us have gotten stuff from our kids' school, sent home and you're like, what is this? Like, I don't know, because the school forgets that the parents aren't employed by the school district. We don't have any context here of what they're talking about. So the biggest thing is, how can we distill it down and realize that our audience doesn't have the full context we have, but we have to work really hard to make it simple and clear for people to engage. No,
I love that. And sometimes it's just literally we try to get so fancy with names and terminology and things like that, but sometimes it's literally just calling it what it is.
Bro, again, people, you're listening to this, you don't know. I have kind of an imaginary soapbox I'm going to shift to for a second here on video. But, it's like, why is it that women's ministry stuff always sounds like it's a baked good or flowers, and men's ministry is always cars or sports stuff? What is driven? What is engaged? Because nobody in your congregation knows. They have no idea what you're talking about. Years ago, I worked at a church where
kind of call it what it is.
Yeah, we had this problem where we would name events, we'd name meeting rooms, we'd name ministries.
Sure.
And so one time, I did a quiz I was on the executive team, and I said, "Okay, can somebody? We're going to do a quiz. What events are these?" And they said, "These have all happened in the last 3 years here." And I'd gone on and looked at our bulletins and just picked 5 random ones. Nobody knew what they were. My favorite was one called Birdsong. And I said, "We're on stage announcing Engage is hosting Birdsong. Buy your tickets." And I go, and the people who work here don't even know what that means. Right? It's like, we've got to distill it down and make it simple, because one of my favorite sayings that I use with companies all the time is, if you confuse, you lose. Like we see it in the Old Testament. What's one way that armies lost? God put confusion in the armies. What's one of the reasons that the San Francisco 49ers won this year's Super Bowl? Is if you go watch the footage, when they got to the overtime coin toss, they flipped the coin. They choose to take the ball, I think, and then the Chiefs get it, or they're going to get it back. They released NFL Films releases footage in the days afterwards, and the San Francisco 49ers players are going, "I didn't know that's what the rules were." They were confused about how to play the biggest televised event on the planet, and they did because they were confused about the rules, and that's part of the reason they lost.
Wow. I didn't expect it. I did not expect it to take this turn. I got to be honest with you, but ultimately the confuse and you lose. I mean, it's so true. What I'm hearing is, I know on the other side of this, there are ministry leaders who have worked really hard to be creative and try to come up with something that they feel like is exciting. That's what they've done when they've come up with these names and these themes and things like that. But I think this is a good example of a time when, clarity trumps creativity, right? It's 1,000%. Not that you shouldn't be creative and creativity is a bad thing, but if it's confusing people, then you've missed the whole point. Would you agree with something like that?
100%. Years ago, I had a season where I was a student pastor, and we had this lady in our church who's our senior pastor's executive assistant. She had been in that role for a decade. She was a mom of 2. Her youngest one was graduating high school. So not only had she been on staff for a decade, she had basically been a student ministry mom for about a decade, because her boys were about 4 years apart. And she had been at that church 25 years. Her husband's great-great-great-grandfather gave the original land for the first church building in the 1800s. So they go back. Wow. They knew everything. And she was the most productive person I've ever met on the planet. It was impressive. All of the yellow legal pad. Anyways, I took over student ministry, and our Sunday mornings youth services, or Sunday morning kind of youth gathering, and Wednesday nights were called Canvas and Exchange. I forget which one was which. But nobody could explain to me what those meant. And I had been on staff a year and a half at this point when I moved to this role. So I go in her office one day, I sit down, I said, what are Canvas and Exchange? What does that mean? And she just looked at me and was like, I don't know. I said, what? That was not the answer I was expecting. And she said, it was like 2 youth pastors ago. They had this big thing. They named it. We've just always had it, and nobody's talked about it since, and I have no idea what it's about. And I thought, if she doesn't know, she's in all of our meetings. She has a mind of a steel trap. She's been a volunteer and a staff member for a decade in student ministry and has watched all of this and is very observant and has a great memory. Wow. If she doesn't know, then the 10th grader who comes twice a month, or the parent of the 8th grader whose kid comes 2 or 3 times a month, they have no idea either. So it doesn't really matter what we name it. We may want some kind of unifying name or theme. That's fine. But at the end of the day, why not just call your student ministry like First Church Students? First Church Kids. And we spell kids with an S, not a Z, please. Right. Just be clear about it, because nobody knows. I've worked also seen churches, I've heard about them, where they'll name the rooms, but then they'll change the room name. But people will use the old name of the room instead of the new name. And it's like, nobody knows. Why are we calling this the Jungle Room? This isn't Graceland. Right. That makes no sense.
Yeah. We're trying to help people to be able to get people to pay attention. Mm-hmm. It sounds to me like confuse, you lose. Mm-hmm. Clarity is king. And I think those are things that are so important. And honestly, clarity over creativity when it comes to, we like to try to get fancy sometimes, but honestly, sometimes maybe we just need to go a little bit more simple. I love those things. I know that working as a Storybrand guide, right, you know how important storytelling can be when it comes to communication. And I'm just curious, how would you say that church leaders could kind of work story into their messaging, whether it be for, their Sunday sermon to try to make it more memorable, or maybe it's just to try to get people to hear your announcements?
Yeah, we'll tackle both of those. So the first print thing is we got to realize we're not necessarily talking about telling stories. What we're talking about is the structure of storytelling. So the Storybrand framework is a 7-part framework. Yeah, 7-part framework is from Storybrand is essentially a structure for telling stories. And when I work with companies, I'll ruin movies for them because I'll show them this is the framework for Top Gun Maverick. This is The Lion King. This is Mary Poppins. This is every Hallmark holiday movie. All that stuff. They all follow these same plot points. And honestly, movies are typically not very good if they don't follow these plot points.
Wow.
It's like I've talked, and when I walk companies through it, they'll say, I'll start talking about it. It's like, and this is where the film goes off the rails. They go, yeah, I tried to watch a movie one time and I was so confused. Like I was 20 minutes into what I was watching. So the first thing is we look at the points. And one of the points, there's a couple of points we want to think about. One of the points is every great story has a problem to solve. So when you're thinking about your announcements, I said this earlier, if I'm inviting people to an event, and I love to make fun of men's ministry events because they're such an easy target. But if I'm inviting people to a men's event, what problem does it solve? The problem that it solves is not the fact that I don't have anything to do at 8:30 on a Saturday morning. I got plenty to do at 8:30 on a Saturday morning.
Yeah.
It's more about what is the content going to be that's going to solve or address something that I want to know or learn, or it's going to help me be a better husband, father, leader, entrepreneur, member of the community, whatever, follower of Jesus. Like, what is that? Speak to that first, right? If I'm trying to raise money for something or trying to do a end of year kind of campaign for maybe local schools, what's the problem I'm trying to solve for? How do I speak to that? So that's the concept, this kind of the story concept. I'd really lean in heavily. I'd also lean into making a clear next steps. How many if I had $1 for every time somebody in a movie said, so here's the plan, I'd be a billionaire, right? I'd love to walk into a room just once and like clear the table off, roll out the map and say, here's the plan. But we've got to give people next steps. People aren't stupid. They're just busy and they don't know what you mean. They don't know what it means to go to see Beth at information station. Who is Beth and where's the information station? What you mean to say is go out to the circular table, out the double doors to my right, your left. Like that's what they know. So let's give us steps of what the action steps are. On the sermon side, I think when I think about storytelling, one of the other principles in storytelling is a call to action. So in movies, a lot of times, this is the climactic scene. In Top Gun Maverick, a lot of people have seen that. The climactic scene or the call to action scene is actually the one with Iceman and Maverick in Iceman's office. We've all seen it where, it's this really emotional scene and it's Iceman's last time on camera. And he's basically saying, hey, you got to go do this. Like, suck it up, Buttercup. Right. You got to go do it. And he's calling the hero, Maverick, to action. When I say in churches, we've all been in a sermon and we get to, we think, what am I supposed to do with this? Like, it's great theological truth. It's well spoken. It's well communicated. It's obviously spent a lot of time in prayer studying. And then you get to the end and you're like, what do I do with this on a Tuesday morning at 10:30 or a Friday at 6:15? Like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do here. So I think on the announcement side, I'd really heavy into a problem and plan. On sermons, I'd say call to action. How do I take this timely truth and make it timely to our lives today? How do I apply it? And I think if we have that kind of call to action application of here's what you need now to go do as a result of what you've heard, I think that would help people embrace truth, embrace the truth of Scripture, and then go live it out more clearly and confidently.
No, that's really good. So on those announcements, making sure that there is a clear plan, clear next steps that they can do is ultimate. Because when you give an announcement, you're ultimately hoping that people are going to show up to that event, right? They're going to show up to whatever you're trying to advertise, right? And so giving them a clear plan, making it clear and understandable is the best thing that you can do. But then on that message side, I love that you said, you just got to make it. It's almost like you have to give them handlebars to be able to apply it during the week. Beyond the just the concepts and the theology, right, and the Bible verses, but actually saying like, okay, when you're actually out there, when you're at work, when you're with your family, when you're encountering problems during the week, actually here's some practical things that you can do. I love that.
For sure.
What would you say that there's church teams out there, right? And they may be, there's people who are listening to this today, they may be serving in various positions. What would you say that there's something that anybody, no matter where you're serving in the church, could apply to, try to bring about this clear and impactful communication?
Well, being a clear communicator is hard. Confusion is actually a lot easier because it doesn't take as much work. What is that it's one of those quotes is attributed to Mark Twain on the internet. So I don't know if he said it or not. It's like, Mark Twain, Abe Lincoln, and C.S. Lewis get 90% of the internet's quotes attributed to one of them. But I think he said, I wrote a long letter because I didn't have enough time to write a short one. I think it's Mark Twain or somebody. Who knows who actually said it. And that's the idea. Being a clearer communicator takes a lot of work. So when you're writing, let's say, and even as something as simple as writing an internal email to people, you got to think about it. Kind of goes back to Andy Stanley's 4 questions. What do they need to know? Why do they need to know it? What do they need to do? And why do they need to do it? Right. I think about that. Like, let's get to the core idea of what this thing is about. When we talk about stories and storytelling, great movies oftentimes really just boil down to 1 or 2 ideas. For example, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I'm so lost now as to what's where and what's going on.
There's a lot going on, right?
So much going on. It's more busy than some churches' event calendars. But anyways, I don't know. Like, I know Marvel Phase 4, I think, starts with the Spider-Man after Avengers Endgame, I think, and then it ends with either Black Panther Wakanda Forever, or one of those about that timeline. Anyways, all the movies, all the TV shows in there, which is WandaVision, it's Loki, it's
a lot.
All that. All of those things boil down to the core idea of defining one's identity. They got dozens of hours of shows and movies down to that one idea.
Yeah.
So if they can do that, you can certainly do it to figure out what's the one thing I need to send out in this email to our team this week, or send out to somebody else on staff this week, or our weekly newsletter that we email out. How do we what is that one? What is just the one thing? We don't have to give you 42 things. How do we do just one thing? So I would focus on thinking about the one thing. Is there a problem that needs to be solved here that we're inviting people to by attending or giving or participating, volunteering, they're solving a problem? Are we identifying that clearly and concisely? Are we giving them a next steps? So here's what you need to do, or here's what you need to know. For example, Christmas Eve services are coming up. Here's what you need to know. Our services are at 3 p.m. and 5 p.m. And we're going to open the doors at 2:30. We're going to open at 4:30. We'll have candles that will be battery powered because we don't want to burn ourselves with hot wax. Or tell me what to expect. Here's where kids need to go. Here's where the parking lot's going to be. Like, just tell me what to expect. Plan. Just by doing a couple of those things and really thinking through that lens through everything you communicate is going to actually make you a much clearer communicator. And lastly, the best thing anybody can do when you're communicating is to think about the person you're sending it or speaking to. Even if you're saying, well, we're marketing to everybody. Well, you still got to think about somebody. And the more you treat it like you're communicating to one-on-one somebody in a clear way, the better you're going to be as a communicator.
Wow. No, that's so good. Actually thinking about the people that you're trying to get to listen to this to, right?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. I would ask you this, I'm sure that there's leaders who are listening to this and they feel overwhelmed. Mm-hmm. Let's be honest, right? They're overwhelmed by all of the areas that they may feel like, we need to improve our announcements, need to improve our messaging, all of these different forms of communication. What encouragement would you give to them today?
Okay, so I'm going to go step on some toes again. The first encouragement
we're ready for it.
Well, the first encouragement I would say is, well, this isn't stepping on toes yet. We'll save the step on toes for the next thing. The first thing is everybody's overwhelmed. In the business world, I read the other day, there are over 14,000 different products that fall into the category of marketing technology, right? Wow. And that is up from 5,000 like 8 years ago. Like, it's gone bonkers. So
that's a lot.
Every business owner, every business leader in your church is overwhelmed by this same problem. They're struggling to figure out where all the places need to be. How do we tackle AI? What about email marketing? Like, there's a lot out there that's very confusing and overwhelming. So churches are not the only ones with this. That being said, let me go step on some toes. One of the reasons I think a lot of churches are overwhelmed is because they're listening to a lot of people who sell to churches who are constantly telling you what you should or ought to be doing. And they almost position it like it's this ultimate aspiration you ought to attain. You've got to be all over TikTok. You've got to be all over Instagram. You've got to have sermon clips. You've got to have engaging graphics. You've got to do Facebook groups. You've got to do this. You've got to do that. A lot of that tends to be driven by people outside of churches trying to sell things to churches. And so I see a lot of church leaders get overwhelmed because a lot of very gifted, talented, well-meaning people are trying to serve churches, but they're doing it by trying to sell to churches. And they're trying to set up the standards of here's what you ought to be doing. Well, they think they've got to be in 97 places when they're a church with an average weekly attendance of 450. Like you don't. One of the things I help businesses figure out is we could really narrow our focus in and get a lot bigger before we go. So
absolutely can't do everything, right?
You can't, and you don't have to. I've got a client right now. What a company! It's the B2B company. It's a financial services group that sells to a particular niche industry. They were $4.5 million last year. They're up to $6 million this year. And we've actually, over the last probably 12 or 18 months, reduced the number of marketing channels we're in because we realized we were spreading too thin. It wasn't working.
Wow.
So now we're trying to figure out how do we get better at just a few things. We're trying to get better at email marketing, trying to get better. They do a lot of events. And then how do we get better at partnerships and referrals? Like really those three things are going to help drive this business to hit $10 million in the next 2 years. It works in business. It works in churches. I'm not saying you're going to see $10 million in offering in tithes. What I am saying is part of the overwhelm is we think there's all these things that we should be doing instead of saying, let me just focus on the few things we can do and we ought to be doing to consistently reach our people with the resources we have, with the staff we have, and stop wishing for all these things that just maybe aren't a fit for us. Because what happens for a mega church in, Dallas is going to make no sense for a church in Central Alabama. It just makes no sense. Let's just stop trying to compare ourselves and feel like we have to do all the things and be in all the places. So rant over.
No, I think I hear your heart on this just because churches, oftentimes feel like they have to do everything. And it does become a comparison thing. And we're hearing all these different voices that are telling us different things. But no, I love picking a few things that are actually important to your community, picking a few things that are important to the flock that you have, right? And really leaning into those and giving your best to those and not trying to do something just because a church down the street is doing it, or, someone that you saw on TikTok or Instagram, wherever it may be, is saying that that's the right way to go, but really just trying to lean into that clarity, lean into actually shepherding the people that you have and ministering to them. So no, I appreciate your heart on that subject for sure. Something that we talk a lot about is a healthy church, right? What would you say, in your opinion, would be one essential component of a healthy church? Maybe it's clear communication.
Well, clear communication is definitely one, but that's not what I was going to say. I probably should say that one. Boy, this might get me in trouble again. A commonality I've seen between healthy churches and unhealthy churches is also the same commonality I've seen between healthy businesses and unhealthy businesses. Okay. And the healthy ones, whoever's at the top, senior pastor, business as a CEO or an owner or whatever, when that top person does not always have to be the smartest person in the room, that's often a key indicator for me that this is a healthy organization. Like I can tell you,
surrounding yourself by people who are specialists in things. Yeah.
And you're leaning on people's expertise and you're letting people flourish in their gifts. I've seen so many situations. Like I've got, for example, I know a guy who sold his company, a strong believer. He and his wife built a company that sold it for over $100 million. They've done really well, very involved in their church, give to a lot of organizations. They're giving to a lot of people, very servant minded, but they financially have obviously done really well. And I've gotten to work with him on some of his companies a few times. And he texted me last week with a question, and it's like, he knows way more than I do. He's older than I am. His kids are a lot older than ours. He's obviously done way more than I ever have. But there's a reason why his company grew and is so successful, and so is the other things he's done, because he doesn't have to be the smartest guy in the room. He just says, I've been put in this role. I'm a decision maker. I am the ultimate decider. I bear that responsibility. But part of being a decider is, in order to grow this thing and fulfill the mission and achieve what we know what our vision is, we have to let other people flourish. And that helps create the kind of downstream environment that everybody else can really thrive in.
100%. Yeah. No, I love that. Kind of the way that we like to wrap things up is we like to do a final five, kind of a rapid fire round. Are you up for doing a couple questions like that?
Let's do it.
Awesome. All right. Well, yeah, let's jump right in. What would you say is one book on this subject that you would recommend for church leaders?
I would say Building a Storybrand by Donald Miller. I'm very biased because I'm certified in that framework. The new edition of it, the updated edition comes out in January. It's called Building a Storybrand 2.0. But that's a great book. I would not say you can use it for your overall church. Absolutely. A lot of churches have, but it's also great for just updating your website language, being better at announcements, ministries, campaigns, that kind of stuff. So Building a Storybrand by Donald Miller.
No, that's great. The second one is, what is the last thing that you listened to on Spotify or Apple Music, wherever you listen to
Apple Music? And it was for my Baptist friends, it was Christmas grape juice hour. For my Presbyterian friends, it was Christmas cocktail hour. Like Christmas jazz standards sort of thing. It's good.
Oh, that's awesome. It is that time of year. Got to have the Christmas music going. What would you say is your favorite piece of technology or software these days?
AI, honestly. I bounce back and forth almost every day between ChatGPT and Claude to help me automate things, to help me synthesize things. I'm using AI right now to help build an app for a client.
Wow.
But AI tools for AI, even just for all the admin folks here, and you say, I don't even know what to use AI for. Go to ChatGPT and have it give you a formula for a spreadsheet, and it will spit it out without you having to figure out the most complicated. Think of the most complicated formula that comes to mind, and it'll give it to you. It's crazy, and it's so helpful.
Yeah. No, that's awesome for sure. What would you say is a quote or maybe some advice that has stuck with you over the years?
The quote is one I said earlier, which is Donald Miller's, "If you confuse, you lose." I mean, I think about that all the time. And I've walked in large organizations, small organizations, and when confusion is present, everything just gets harder.
For sure. No, that's really good. And finally, what is one thing that you'd like to communicate to our audience of church leaders today?
If you confuse, you lose. We've got to work twice as hard these days to communicate to people. We can no longer assume people know what we're saying or that they're going to remember what they're saying. They're not coming every Sunday into all of our stuff anymore. It's just not the world we're in. So we've got to work even harder to use clear, simple, plain language that is going to stick.
No, that's so good. Wes, this conversation has been awesome. I feel like you've dropped a couple of truth bombs on us, right? But you've also just given us just some great advice for being able to go out there and to communicate clearly. So thank you so much for being on here today. What would you say? Where's the best place that people can follow you? Where can people contact you and get in touch with you if they want to check out some of your services?
Yeah, you can go to wesgay.com/CLL for Church Leadership Lab, wesgay.com/CLL. I have a couple of resources there for church leaders on communication. You'll also be able to jump on my email list where about every week I send out something that's just help you be a better communicator, better marketer, better writer, that kind of stuff. Also, you see my stuff on wesgay.com, Instagram.com/wesgay, Facebook.com/wesgay. I'm on LinkedIn if anybody's on LinkedIn. I am on the artist formerly known as Twitter still. I still call it Twitter because X sounds weird.
I still haven't gotten used to it.
I Googled something about X yesterday. I was trying to find a link to the advanced search because I was trying to find a particular thing, and it still said Twitter is where it's happening was the headline of X.com. And I'm like, maybe it's going to change.
What did you say? What was that? Confuse, you lose? Yeah, no, I don't know. That's tough. That's tough.
You want to talk about confuse, you lose? Let's go look at the Jaguar rebrand that's happened in the last 2 weeks.
Oh yeah, that's has filled my entire feed, and that's
there's a lot of big feelings about that one in the marketing world.
A lot of big feelings. Wes, this has been incredible. I hope that, for everyone listening today, I hope you will check out some of his resources. And, overall, just I want to thank you again, Wes, for being on here and talking with us. And for everyone who's listened today. Thank you for sitting, joining us sitting all the way through to the end and taking notes and doing all of these things, because I truly believe that it will help. If you can apply these principles, I think it'll really help you in your ministry. And so if you did get something valuable out of this today and you've been able to take something away from it, all that we would ask from you, for those at home, is to just follow us, to leave a review right there wherever you listen to your podcast. We would ask for you to share it. If you have a friend in ministry that could that this could benefit for them hearing, I just ask, send over a link to them, share that link and help us to spread the word about this podcast. If you are watching this over on YouTube, definitely hit that subscribe button, leave a comment there and let us know if you have any opinions on all of these things that we've talked through today. We would love to hear from you. All of those things just helps us to get this in the ears of more and more church leaders. And so we thank you for those simple shares. They go a really long way. Thank you again, Wes, for being on here. Thank you to all of our listeners. We will see all of you right here next time on Church Leadership Lab.
This episode of the Church Leadership Lab podcast is brought to you by Ministry Brands, the largest provider of church technology software. Over 90,000 churches rely on Ministry Brands for their single platform solution that brings together all the digital tools a church needs. From online giving to websites to church management software and more, Ministry Brands is leading the way in simple to use, innovative solutions, all with the goal of empowering healthy churches. To learn more, visit ministrybrands.com.